I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. So since I've been in school, I've kind of been in a hole. And the reason I'm recording it is there's so many people that asked me to do this presentation, and now I'll actually have a copy of it. So anything that could have gone wrong this morning for technology actually went wrong. But I had a backup and a backup and a backup, and then they had a backup and a backup, so it kind of turned out. And that's actually one of the personality styles that we're going to talk about. The cool thing is this is the first time I actually have a slide that actually goes with the presentation. But what I'm actually going to talk about is understanding different personality styles. And this may help you with people that you work with people that you live with, significant others, children, and anywhere else that you go to understand the different personality styles. So I call it mind-boggling to mind-blowing. So let me ask you, is there anybody, have you been around somebody who absolutely drives you crazy? Never, right? No. Yeah, today, actually, just this morning. The reason why people drive us crazy is because we tend to make a lot of different assumptions. And with the assumptions are that people should act and behave the way that we act and behave. And if they don't, then there's something wrong with them. So we either get frustrated, but we really expect that they're going to do things the way that we're going to do things. And then we're quite confused as to why aren't they doing it our way. And if you can think about situations when you're working with somebody, if you've ever asked somebody to follow through on a particular task that you've done in the past, and then they do it in a vastly different way, you kind of think they're being stupid. And it's just that people are different. And so this is going to help you understand the different styles. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody has given you a gift, and they're so excited about you opening this gift, and it's beautifully wrapped, and you're thinking, oh, this is going to be really good, and they're all hyped. Oh, I can't wait for you to open it. You're absolutely going to love it. And so they're like, hurry up, open it, open it. And then you rip it open, and you open it, and you're like, oh, thanks. And you try to be polite, and you try to smile, but what's going through your head? Yeah, what the? And so why would that person have thought that you would have loved it so much?
Because they would have loved it.
Exactly. And that's the assumption that we make all the time, is that the things that we like and the way that we do things is the way that other people would enjoy them. And then we're quite surprised when that's actually not the case. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tony Alessandra that has created what's called the Platinum Rule. Everybody's heard the Golden Rule, right? Which is treat other people the way that you want to be treated. The Platinum Rule is treat other people the way they want to be treated. And so that's the premise of today, is to go through the 4 different behavioral styles to help you understand what your style is, as well as what's the style of other people, so that you can adjust and then strengthen your relationships with them. And so different personality styles or different behavioral styles have different tendencies. And I'm going to give you just a quick overview. This is only about a 15-20 minute presentation of a much larger 2-hour presentation, but I've stuffed as many nuggets in here as possible so that you get a good takeaway. So basically there's 4 behavioral styles. Has anybody ever heard of Aristotle? No. Back in the day, he actually came up with 4 different styles that were based on fluids in the body. So he had like sanguine, choleric, melancholy. It's always one more that I mess up. But his theory was that different fluids and an excess of the fluids is actually what created different personalities or different behavioral styles. And over the years, this has completely evolved. And so is anybody familiar with the DISC assessment? So this is loosely based off of the DISC assessment. Some people do animals, some people do colors. I created what's called MIND, and MIND is an acronym for motivators, investigators, nurturers, and directors. So those are the 4 different behavioral styles. Now, if you take a look, the motivator style is usually very outgoing, very energetic, likes to be the center of attention, no problem being in the spotlight. They're big picture thinkers, and they're really good at coming up with creative ideas and thinking outside of the box. The opposite style of the motivator is actually the investigator. Now, the investigator style is likes to focus on the details, very methodical, very analytical, highly organized. So this morning when I walked in, my 2 lovely gentlemen that greeted me said, I don't have a personality style, I'm boring. That's an investigator. And I'll go through how you can tell a little bit of the different styles just based off of body language, as well as dress and demeanor and that kind of thing. Now, the third style is actually the nurturer. Now, the nurturer is very pleasant, very considerate, wants to keep the peace with everybody. Out of all of the styles, they're the best listener, and they're the most engaging with other people. Now, the opposite style of the nurturer is the director. Now, the director loves to be in control. They're very goal-oriented, and they're focused on getting things done, very focused on results. So that's the opposite of the nurturer. Sometimes the nurturer gets their feelings hurt because the director can come across as a little abrasive, according to them, and the director might feel that the nurturer is a little wishy-washy, so it drives them nuts. So you can start seeing how just based off of the 4 different styles, it will create some level of conflict, some level of stress, and a whole lot of misunderstanding. Now, I'm glad that you guys are all referencing with the sheets, because that's a little cheat sheet that talks about the 4 different styles. But basically, if you want to know what somebody's style is, so let me ask you something. If you were dealing with somebody who was a big picture thinker versus somebody who was highly analytical, would you have a different conversation with them? How so? Would you try to focus more on the details or less on the details? Robin?
Well, I was going to say that my boss is that, and I
Is what?
And I is the analytical
Investigator, yeah?
investigator, and I'm the motivator, and I have to completely have my approach with her because it is all about the facts, get in, get out.
Right.
Yeah.
No chit chat. I don't really care how your weekend went.
Right.
Yeah, they're very much focused on business. So if you go back and you look at these dimensions, the first dimension is to identify whether or not they're people-oriented or whether they're task-oriented. And just as Robin mentioned, her boss is actually task-oriented. Uh-oh. Oh, I think the battery died. No. Something happened. So if they're task-oriented, just like you said, they're focused on making sure that they get things done. And if they're people-oriented, they're focused on connecting with people. And it's quite easy, honestly, to tell the difference right away. Now, not everybody is a pure blend and 100%. So as you're thinking about this in terms of yourself, you might find that you're a little bit in different styles. But what I want you to focus on is what your main preference is or what your main style is. So what you'll find is if somebody's task-oriented and you're people-oriented, you can adapt. So we have the tendency to be all 4. But if we adapt all the time, it actually becomes exhausting. So you might find in terms of dealing with your boss, if you have an in-depth, conversation for too long, it will actually be grueling for you. Because they're so nitty-gritty in the detail and you're big picture, and so for you to have to adjust to that becomes very difficult. So this isn't a matter of are you capable of any of the styles. We're all focused on all of the styles. This is really a matter of what's your preference, what comes easiest for you. So if we go back, there's 2 dimensions. Do you focus on people or do you focus on tasks? That's one dimension. The second dimension is are you fast-paced or are you slow-paced? Now, do you think you can easily tell the difference between whether or not somebody's fast-paced or slow-paced? How could you tell? Yeah, so fast-paced people talk fast, walk fast, eat fast, drive fast. Everything they do fast. And if they can do it combined so that they can multitask, even better. So typically your fast-paced people, when they're sitting there, they've got their foot going, they're the ones clicking the pens because they're constantly wanting to go. And your slower-paced people are very deliberate in what they say and what activities they take. And now an easy way for you to tell whether you're fast-paced or slow-paced is generally when you talk to somebody, do you finish their sentence or do you just nod repeatedly because you're trying to absorb the information? If you finish their sentence, you're a fast-paced person. And if you nod repeatedly because other people are going at warp speed, you're likely a slow-paced person. So those are the 2 dimensions on which you want to take a look at. So if we look at this focus and attention, are we focused on people or are we focused on tasks? Out of the styles that are focused on people, it's the motivator and the nurturer. And if you're focused on tasks, it's the director and the investigator. So an easy way for you, an easy way for you to decide whether or not you're task-oriented or people-oriented is considering that you're in the middle of your day, you're behind on a bunch of projects that you want to get done, and a friend or a family calls because they're having a bad day and they want to chat. If you take that call, Shelly's like, not happening. If you take that call, you're people-oriented. If you say, I don't have time for this, you're task-oriented. So Shelly, I'm guessing task-oriented at that point. Because the chat is not actually going to happen. And then in terms of looking at pace, you look at whether or not you're comfortable initiating activities or whether you would just prefer to observe. So if you're comfortable initiating things, you would not be timid. You would go up to people, you would introduce yourself, you would be very comfortable, you would make connections, you would coordinate activities. And if you're slower paced, you'll tend to be more observant and more deliberative. So in that case, you'd rather stand on the outskirts and kind of watch what's going on before you immediately jump in. Now, if you're slower paced, you're investigator and nurturer. And if you're fast paced, you're motivator and director. So if you look at your handout, you'll see that there's the 4 boxes on the first page. And so if you're fast paced and task oriented, you're a director. But if you're slow paced and task oriented, you're an investigator. Now, if you're fast paced but people oriented, you're a motivator. And if you're slow paced but people oriented, you're a nurturer. So let's go through the styles a little bit more in detail. Here's your quintessential motivator. You can spot them from a mile away because they're super happy to see you. They're happy to enjoy the world, and everything is an actual adventure. So typically they're smiling, typically they're upbeat, they're dressed in very bright colors. Anything they can to stand out because they love the center of attention, that will give you your indication that that's an actual motivator. So when I look around the room with a mixture of men and women, I can usually spot the motivator men very easily. Do you know what I look for? Color. Because the motivator men tend to wear very bright colors and patterns. The other thing that they're most interested in these days are really funky socks and then cufflinks and ties.
Hey, everybody's looking at you.
And if I look at a motivator for a female, typically it's the same thing, bright colors, but they like shiny, sparkly things. So big jewelry, different bags, very colorful, total motivator all the way through. So we know that the motivator actually likes big picture, very creative, right? Likes to be the center of attention. Out of all of the styles, they're the most warm and easy to get along with. They can meet you for the first time and you feel like you've known them forever. Very easy to talk to. They've got that charm. They've got that swagger. They can just walk in easily and connect with people. Not me at all. The next one is the investigator. So the investigator is very analytical, very detail-oriented. One of the ways that I can spot an investigator typically is they like to wear glasses out of all of the styles. That's like their main accessory. And they tend to wear darker colors that are very practical. So they might wear dark colored pants and maybe switch up their tops, but it's nothing over the top, nothing to be the center of attention. The dead giveaway when you're dealing with an investigator is they're very curious. And so they're typically looking at things, and the way that they do that is they've got their hand on their chin or they're contemplating something. So when you start seeing that deep in thought type thing, that's actually your investigator. I know, you look around the room and then just spot it very easily. And you don't actually have to see the person. You know, you could listen to a voice message or read an email, and you can tell based off of that what somebody's style is. Because a motivator is going to have colorful language. They're literally going to have color in their emails and lots of emoticons. And an investigator is typically going to be in bullet point. They have to remind themselves to even give a greeting or a salutation. You know, like hello would be really nice. But usually an investigator is focused on efficiency. So sometimes they overlook some of the pleasantries. The next one is the nurturer. Now the nurturer is very accommodating, very easy to get along with. They are the peacekeepers. They absolutely hate conflict, and they will do whatever they can to avoid the conflict, which means they'll keep their mouth shut. The problem is they'll hold it in, they'll hold it in, they'll hold it in. They'll go postal, and then they'll apologize, and they'll go back to holding it in, holding it in. But they get really, really frustrated when other people take advantage of them because they're very accommodating. So one of their challenges is actually setting boundaries. Now, the easiest way to spot a nurturer is they also don't like being the center of attention. Even though they're people-oriented, they don't like being in the limelight. So they like deep, intimate, genuine relationships. So when they're interacting with people, they prefer it to be 1 or 2 people and nothing more than that. 3 is far too much for a nurturer. They dress very low-key in neutral toned type colors, anything that they kind of blend in so that they don't stand out too much. You're not going to see the women with big high heels, lots of makeup, and lots of jewelry when they're a nurturer. They're far more reserved. Same with the men. The men are going to be in polos, tan-colored pants, and very casual. And they're very much focused on people and genuine type relationships and connecting with people. And then you've got the director. So the director is all about focused on results and goal-oriented. They're very, very driven. They don't let anything get in the middle of them focusing on what that end result is and what that end goal is. The easiest way to spot a director is actually their posture. So a director tends to take up a lot of space because they're dominant. And one of the ways you might see that on an airplane, they take both rest arms without consideration of who's beside them, or at a movie theater. When they sit down, they'll take up lots of space. And even when they're sitting, their legs will be out so that they've got lots and lots of space. And taking up space is actually an indicator of status, right? Like there's a whole thing to the big corner office, overlooking everything because that's status. The directors, another way that you might notice their, based off of their body language and the way that they dress is they're very status oriented, so they'll have very expensive status type things. The motivator is focused on kind of pop culture and being trendy, but the director is very much focused on making sure that it gives a very good impression. So they'll have a very nice watch. They'll be dressed up. They believe that you have to dress for success. And so those are some indicators in terms of the director. The other thing that's kind of easy about the director is they have no problems bragging on themselves. So they'll tell you about all their recent accomplishments and what they've got going on and what's so wonderful. That actually is the opposite of the nurturer. The nurturer has a very difficult time talking about any recent accomplishments that they have. And I'm actually doing a presentation next week for a women's group. And if you look at the differences between men and women, aside from personality, it's that men have actually been trained to focus on their accomplishments and women have been trained societally to not. So a lot of times when you see this with genders, it's easy to spot a director as a woman because she can brag on herself. And that's abnormal for what women typically do. Does that make sense? All right. So let's talk a little bit about grocery shopping. You can spot people's styles anywhere you go. And so for me, the airport, the grocery store, Disneyland, it doesn't matter. It's just pure entertainment for me. So out of the 4 different styles, the director, by the way, hates doing trivial type tasks. So if they don't have to go to the grocery store and they can delegate it or get somebody else to do it, they'll absolutely do that. If by chance, though, they're the one that has to go and they've got to pick up milk, eggs, and bread, they'll walk in, they'll grab milk, eggs, and bread in record time. They won't talk to a soul, and they'll be in and out in a flash. They'll be the quickest ever and make sure that it gets done and move along. The investigator, on the other hand, will create a list of the items that they need, and then they'll make a list of the list to make sure that it's in order or somewhat related to where it's located within the store. So I'll put all the fruits and vegetables together so that when they go, everything is based off of efficiency. I knew a guy that made an Excel spreadsheet of his grocery list, and he didn't like spending time every week to make a list, so he made an Excel spreadsheet. And then whatever he needed that week, he just highlighted. And one of the things he did is he had his days matched with food. So like Monday was fish day, Tuesday was steak. Everything was complete. I've had other people that they wear clothes based off of a certain day, so that everything is efficient. If you think about the number of decisions that we make in any given day, we make thousands upon thousands of decisions. So in their mind, it's exhausting, and they can be better suited to other things, so they'll just have that systematized. That's your investigator at the grocery store. Now, for the motivator goes to the grocery store like it's an amusement park. So they go milk, eggs, bread, right? And so when they get there, they're like pizza. Easily, pretty shiny object syndrome, easily get sidetracked. And then they walk out with like 6 bags of groceries, no milk and eggs. And then they get home and they're like, we should order Chinese. They're very in the moment, highly spontaneous, and they like to be adventurous. They don't want to do things the same way twice if they don't have to. And then the nurturer is very sequential, and they have a method at which they go grocery shopping. And they are, of all the styles, they're very, very loyal. So one of the things that they have is if they go to Publix, they go to their Publix. Like the one beside, then that's the only one. Because if you go to a different one and it's all laid out differently, that's just too stressful for a nurturer. So a nurturer, milk, eggs, bread, they'll go in and they'll actually go up and down each aisle because that's what they do. That's their way of grocery shopping, and they're very much focused on routine. Do you do that? Yeah, regardless, right? Like you can't just go milk, eggs, and bread. You've got to do what your actual routine is. Of all of the styles, the nurturer is also the most resistant to change. So if they change the layout of the grocery store and start moving things around, that's just like completely overwhelmed. Stressful, yeah, really stressful. So that's grocery shopping. In terms of body language, I mentioned this a little bit. So the easiest way to spot the different styles, Motivator is very upbeat, has a big smile. Investigator is very deep in thought, tend to wear dark colors. Nurturer is very accommodating. The easiest way to spot a nurturer is looking at their head. They're the only style that does the head tilt. So when they sit and listen to you, their head tilts. And they tend to be the one listening and not the one actually talking. And then the last one is the director. And the director often has what's called the Superman pose or some other stature that gives them a sense of presence when they walk into a room. So that is all the 4 styles. Now, based off of the 4 styles, that changes how you manage stress, how you communicate, how you resolve conflict, how you prioritize your time. All of that is vastly different depending on your style. So if you're aware of what your particular style is and you can easily spot the style of somebody else, then you can easily adjust without becoming exhausted because you don't want to do it for a prolonged period of time to actually enhance that relationship. So thank you all for your time this morning and going over the different behavioral styles.
Robin, do you?
Fast, and I know one of them says that you can be